Bees, Srinivasan, for example, in Australia, does this beautiful experiment where you have a Y branch, where at the entry of the Y branch, the bee flies in and sees a red light. And then at the branch point, one of the branches has a red and one of them has a green light. And you can train the bee very quickly, or possibly even quicker than a monkey, in what's called delay match to sample or delay non-match to sample, where the bee will fly in the maze, realize it's red, and then realize, okay, now I have to leave by the red exit. And then you can stagger this. You can stagger these mazes, and so you have 10 of these decision points. At each point, it knows, okay, I saw the red, so I always have to take the red. Or instead of having red, green, you do vertical, horizontal. Or you can generalize. You can go from vision to smell. Or it can do non-match to sample, where it remembers anything that's not green. I always have to pick the branch point that's not green. That's really a very complicated very complicated behavior. And so I don't know. Since I realized this, I don't kill bugs anymore, because we just don't know whether it doesn't feel like something to be conscious. For the same reason, I also turned into vegetarian. Anyhow. And of course, what this is a realization that came first to us by philosophers Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and later on by Sigmund Freud. Most of our behaviors, not just high-level behaviors, most of our behaviors occur in the absence of conscious sensation. This includes things like talking, right? I have no idea. I just have no idea how sentences are formed inside. It's not that I say, okay, this is what I want to say. This is a noun, this is a verb, and then I translate it from German to English, and then I send it to my larynx. I just have a vague idea, and then next things I hear these words come tumbling out of my mouth. And that's true for almost everything. I open my eyes, and I immediately, within a fraction of a second, I see you. I don't have access to the color stages. I don't have access to the edge detection. I don't have access to any of these stages. I have access to this beautiful design interface, much better even than a Macintosh interface, believe it or not. Beautiful interface that seamlessly and that hides all these computational functions that hides from me. So the point is, I probably only have access to a very small fraction of the structures in my brain. And so this is what Francis Crick and I have been advocating since many years, to focus specifically on what we call the neural correlates of consciousness. What are the minimal mechanisms that are jointly necessary for anyone that are necessary for any specific conscious content, like seeing blue or smelling mom's apple pie. So we tend to emphasize local properties of neural circuits, without neglecting what Jerry Edelman, Tononi emphasized, the dynamic core, the more global aspects of consciousness. And I'll come back to that in my very last slide. So what's the experimental program? Consciousness is not so much a philosophical problem anymore. It used to be one purely, but it's now, as John Searle has emphasized, it's now becoming more and more a purely empirical problem. So one thing we need, just like a Turing test, we need a consciousness. Because, of course, there's no direct relationship between intelligence and consciousness. We need an assay. We need a battery of tests that we can use in patients, in babies, in fetuses, in monkeys, in mice, in bugs, in flies, in C. elegans, in Drosophila. We need behaviors that require consciousness in these various animals. And then lastly, we must move, and neuroscience is now in a position to do so, particularly with the aid of molecular biology. We need to move from correlation, from saying, well, whenever I'm conscious of red, this part of the brain lights up. And whenever the monkey sees, this green bar, these neurons fire. That's all observation. That's correlation. We need to move from correlation to causation. So while I talk, you should fixate. Right? Just fixate the cause. Can we dim the room lights? Just fixate the cause. This is the oldest technique in psychology. It's called an after effect. Just remember, is it possible to dim them, to turn them off altogether? Just remember what the colors are. Red is in the upper left and green is in the right. Can we also dim these? Do you see colors? Yes? No? Let's try this again. Okay, so just fixate anyway. It doesn't really matter. The cause. Right? So you should be able to see colors here, right? Now these are called, they're not real. This, by the way, belies the naive notion, what some people call naive realism, that there's a simple one-to-one mapping between the outside world and the inside world in the privacy of our head. Because here, as you see after a while, there is no color really there. It's gray, yet you perceive these colors very vividly, albeit only for a brief time. So now you can, this is another illusion. Can we turn out those spots for this briefly?
No, actually, because we got to see you.
All right, so what you should do is fixate the cross here. Fixate the cross, don't move your eyes, and tell me what you see. All right, so as you point out, you should see a big sphere called structure for motion, rotating. But in addition, as at least one person said, you see yellow squares, right? And they should disappear. Otherwise, you should come see me afterwards. All right, one or both of them may disappear. And, you just have to trust me, I'm a scientist. I'm not turning off the monitor here. Plus, of course, you can ask your neighbor and you can check. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. You can query your neighbor, when do they disappear for her and when do they disappear for you, and they disappear at different times. This is a nice illusion. It's called motion-induced blindness. It's the simplest illusion. It's the one that's easiest to demonstrate in a lecture hall of what we call perceptual suppression, where something is physically present, yet sometimes you see it, sometimes don't. And this is a very simple operational definition of consciousness, right? It's very difficult to define what consciousness is. But here, sometimes you're conscious of the yellow and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you see the yellow, you can talk about them, they remind you of the yellow sun and yellow Van Gogh and all sorts of other yellow things, and sometimes you can't, they're just gone. So where's the difference in the brain? Very simple question. Where's the difference in the brain between this conscious state and the unconscious state? Now remember the after effect, right? So the question is, will you get... just keep on fixing there. Will you get an after effect for the yellow squares? All right? You should all see the squares, right? And they have an interesting dynamic that we still don't understand, right? They wax and wave. Do you see that? Sometimes it's there and sometimes they're not there. And this becomes sort of weaker. Now, one question is that people, until 10 years ago would have just thought stupid, is do you need to see the yellow in order to get an after effect? In other words, for example, when you compare, let's say you have your range circumstance that for 5 seconds you don't see this yellow square, it is perceptually suppressed. But for 5 seconds you do see this yellow square. Now you can compare the after image. You can compare the strength of the after image and the duration. You can ask, is there a difference? Okay, we did this clear, very simple, unambiguous answer. There's no difference. Whether or not you see the yellow squares makes absolutely no difference to the strength and duration of the after effect. Why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because it tells you something. It tells you, A, that you can make progress on the question of consciousness. We're not forever condemned just to talk about it. And furthermore, more specifically, it tells you that in the hierarchy in the visual hierarchy going from the retina to primary visual cortex, etc., the stages where the after effect happens, which is primarily the retina, occurs before the stage where the consciousness happens, where the NCC for yellow squares is. So in other words, whether or not the after effect happens, let's say, in the retina primarily, consciousness for this yellow square probably is in a higher cortical area. So the after effect is totally independent of conscious sensation. Yeah. Not totally, please. All right, who do you see here? All right, that's it. George Carey. Okay. No, don't turn them all the way on because I need them down. Who do you see now? This is pure Bush. And who do you see now? All right, so some of you had the effect. So what happens here is 3 pictures. The first picture is a mixture that we've morphed for one individual, where half the time the individual says, I see Kerry, and half the time I see Bush. The second image is 100% Bush. The third image is exactly the same as the first image. But now, since you looked at Bush for a while, you adapt to Bush, and you're less likely to see Bush. It's not true in reality, unfortunately. So this is called a phase-specific after effect. It's very specific to phases. It's specific to the identity. It's specific to ethnicity. So if you adapt to a white face, then you're less likely to see a white face. It's specific to gender, and it's specific to identity, which implies there have to be very specific neuronal mechanisms in the brain that mediate this. Now, again, you can ask the question. I won't tell you how we do it. It's a more fancy technique. Do you need to see the face in order to get a phase-specific after effect? And we have techniques. Just like David Copperfield, right? You go to David Copperfield shows, he has a beautiful bikini-clad assistant, and he'll make things disappear in front of your eyes, right? Happens